Black Lives Matter? I was asked a question that totally surprised me and almost threw me off. And the question was simply, should all Black Lives matter to all black people from different continents and different nations? In other words, are the destinies of black people interconnected? Brother Tyre Nichols was an African American brother who was just laid to rest at the beginning of Black History Month after being savagely and brutally beaten and murdered by the police in Memphis, Tennessee. May his soul rest in peace. So, should the murders and injustice of African Americans, Black Lives Matter to black people from Africa, the Caribbean, black immigrants in the USA, or for that matter, to all black people around the world? On the flip side, brothers Amadou Diallo and Lyoya were African immigrants in the United States who were brutally and savagely murdered by the police in New York City and Michigan. So, should African Black Lives matter to African Americans and other black people in the United States and around the world? The answers to this question seem self-evident to me, but after further thought, I believe it is very important to kind of decipher what's the motivation behind these type of questions, kind of peel off the layers so that ultimately we can move forward and advance our cause. And this conversation, I think, is particularly important now that we're going through Black History Month, because looking back to history can teach us a lot about the collaboration that has always existed between black people of different origins. But no matter where you stand on this issue of black unity or unity between black people of different origins, I think it is important to gauge where does your position or how does your position help advance the situation for black people. And especially for this platform, AfriKili. Because ultimately for us, it is never about just blaming, accusing, or pointing. No, it is about figuring out how to advance. It is about advancing. So there you have it. Let's dive in, let's fasten our seatbelts, and let's get to work. Hello family, welcome to another edition of AfriKili. As a reminder, the words AfriKili is a contraction between two words, the words Africa and Akili, which means intelligence in Swahili, which is the most spoken African language in Africa. So AfriKili stands for African intelligence. If you're new to our platform, I'd like to urge you to also go to our website, which is www.afrikili.com, and enter your email address so that you may get future installments of our written blog, which also I know some of you, through comments and messages that you send me, some of you really appreciate the written articles that we have on the website. And of course, to all of you who are joining us today, I really want to thank you for tuning in. But make sure, if you've not subscribed yet, please subscribe to our social media profiles, like this YouTube video, share it in your network so a lot more people can get value from the content that we are creating. And of course, you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media profile. So, back to the opening question. Should Black Lives matter? But more importantly, should the Black lives of Caribbeans, Black immigrants, continental Africans, South Americans, should all those Black lives matter to each other, to Black people from different origins? But really, the topic today touches a very important issue, which is the issue of unity between Black people of different origins. Now, before diving deeper, let me just say that this topic is so broad, and it's obviously not a new topic, but it is so massive that there's just no way to cover it in one video, all right? So I'm going to divide it in 3 videos. So on the first video today, what we will do is to just kind of compare and look at similarities between the experiences of Black people from different origins. And then in our next video, we will take a deeper look into history, which is also relevant because we're going through Black History Month right now. But we'll look at history to see specific examples and situation depicting how black people from Africa, from the Caribbean, from America have always worked together. So we'll pull up concrete examples, and that might shed a light on a lot of people who have doubt on this topic. And then our final video is when we'll go into the how-to. We'll concretely look at how do we build coalitions, powerful coalitions, to really help transform the situation for black people around the world. So also, let me just say before we get started here in today's conversation, now I know this topic is can be very controversial and elicits a lot of strong emotions. And I know that many of you will most likely disagree with me. But if that applies to you, let me at least urge you to follow this video all the way to the end, all right? You might still find value, you might find information that might be useful to you. Because I'm a firm believer in the saying that says that out of the clash of ideas comes the light. But also know that many of you will agree with me. And so if that applies to you, I really want to hear your perspective, your comments. Make sure to include your comments in this video and other platforms. Because again, at the end of the day, I can never be satisfied with just, putting all this content out and just talking. That's never satisfactory. Really, ultimately, it's about concretely advancing. And so that is the essence of what we do and what we stand up for. So let's start today with the case of our brother, Tyre Nichols, who, as we all followed through the news, whether you're in the United States or outside of the United States, our brother was savagely murdered by the police in Memphis, Tennessee, as we all know. So to me, it is very sobering that, again, Tyre Nichols was just laid to rest at the beginning of Black History Month, which is a month where we're supposed to celebrate the accomplishment of black people throughout the history. Now, granted, many people also disagree with the whole concept of Black History Month, saying that, black people are intricately connected to the history anyway. You don't really need a month to celebrate that. We need to be celebrated all the time, which in a sense I agree. And as a matter of fact, one of our previous articles on the website talks about the inception of Black History Month if you're interested to that. So I will put the link on the bottom of this video so you can go and read up about it. Anyways, nevertheless, so I was saying it's very sobering, that brother Tyre Nichols was laid to rest at the beginning of Black History Month. And to me, it is just another clear indication that structural injustices that are felt and experienced by black people are just not a relic of the past. It is not just relegated to history, but it is very much present in the current experience of black people in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. And so the viciousness that the police showed in treating our brother Tyre Nichols was definitely inhumane and appalling. But you know what? Sadly, it is not surprising. It is just the latest manifestation of, quite frankly, an institution that has been biased and oppressive against black people for the longest. I mean, there's a plethora of cases if you doubt that, but I think the facts are there speaking for themselves. And so from our point of view, we need radical changes if we want to make these institutions more equitable and more just. But you know what? Radical change and reforms that we're seeking will absolutely not happen unless black people of different origin come together in unity and form strong coalitions that can then work and demand change. We need unity and we need strong coalition. If not, we might express anger and frustration, but change will not occur. You need coalitions and you need unity. There's just no other way around it. And so one thing that I'd like to say, I would have loved to see more prominent continental African voices, Caribbean voices, voices from South America, like black voices. I would have loved to see more of them use this tragedy to loudly speak up against, obviously, the murder of our brother Tyre Nichols, but also just the structural injustices and murders of black people. I would have really loved to see that. Because, one thing we need to understand is that, black people, no matter what origin they're from, these systems will most likely profile you the same way. There are many instances of people that have been pulled over, and this might be specific to maybe the United States or so on, where you have a lot of traffic stops, where it's the same police that handles traffic stops and so many different things. But there are cases of driving while black, which is experienced by people regardless of their origin, but simply based on the fact that their skin is black. Okay, so based on their skin color. And so to prove this point of not only driving while black, but the fact that you're treated the same way by oppressive systems, there are two names that come to my mind. And you've most likely heard these names. There's the name Amadou Diallo and Patrick Lyoya, who are both African immigrants who were brutally murdered by the police in the United States. The case of our brother Amadou Diallo, a 23-year-old student from the country of Guinea in Africa, who was gunned down by the police on February 4th, 1999. The brother was shot 41 times. Okay, the police shot at him 41 times, with 19 bullets fatally hitting him. 41 times. And so later, the police say that they had mistaken him for a rape suspect, but then later they say a mugging suspect, a robber. So they have mistaken him for somebody else. And he was shot at 41 times. These police officers were tried for second-degree murder, but they were acquitted. And an interesting connection with the case of Tyre Nichols is that the police who murdered the African brother Amadou Diallo in New York City were part of a special crime unit that have since been disbanded also. But yeah, he was shot 41 times. You also have the case of our brother Patrick Lyoya, who was a black immigrant, a refugee from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And he was shot, it was on April 4th, 2022, last year. He was shot brutally in the back of his head by Christopher Scher, who was a police officer for, I believe, 7 years in the police force in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Shot him in the back of the head. Pulled over. That's a black man. So if you have any doubt that your origin matters not, as long as you're black with regards to how you're racially profiled, I think you have more than ample evidence that we share similar fates. Whether you are from Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, or a US-born black person. And just to continue hammering this fact, now I know that anecdotes are not always the most reliable evidence, but I like to use my own experience, where not that long ago, I was driving in a neighborhood in the United States of America, and I get pulled over by this police officer. Traffic stop, no big deal. Now, as the police officer comes to my window, he is cautiously approaching, and all this time with a hand on his gun holster. Walking to my window with a hand on the gun holster. So obviously that told me, okay, you just need to be extra careful. So the police officer comes to my window and obviously asks for the document, the vehicle document, registration, license, and so on. All the while, the hand is on the gun holster. And then he asked me to roll down all of my vehicle windows, which I do. So seeing that the situation was kind of, I would say, sensitive, the man had a hand on his gun. I said, okay, officer, I will reach over to the glove compartment in the passenger side of the vehicle where my documents are. And I also said, okay, I will reach in the back of my pants to pull up my wallet where my driver's license is. So I reach slowly, get the insurance documents, put them down on my lap. I reach back slowly, pull up my wallet, get the license, and then hand them over to the police officer. Now, only then as he's receiving those documents, that the hand eventually comes off of his gun and then grabs the documents. I tell you, once he looked at the documents, he just glanced at them quickly. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, if that, just to look at the documents, handed it back to me and said, okay, sir, you're free to go, without any warning, without any tickets. And so I just asked, okay, so why was I being pulled over? And so he would tell me that, well, it appears that my taillight appeared to be malfunctioning, which is why I was pulled over. I said, okay, got my documents. got back on the road, and got on my way. To me, that was a clear case of driving while black. And my skin color was definitely not differentiated from that of somebody who was born in the United States. Same faith, same experience, treated the same way by institutions. And so, considering that black people share very similar fates from biased systems, why insist on advancing ideas of separation based on the geographical origin or immediate descendants? From an AfriKili standpoint, we believe in unity. As a matter of fact, we believe that all black people are descendant from Africa. I know there are some debates about it, but we believe that all black people are descendant from Africa. But it is true that over the last 400 years or so, obviously black people in different regions of the world have developed different cultures. You cannot discount that. So there have been new cultural development. But still, I believe that there are cultural similarities. There's a cultural fiber that has resisted the test of time throughout many different black cultures around the world. Whether you look at the Garifuna people in countries like Honduras, you look at Cuba with the music and so on, Colombia, you look at Brazil, which some of you might not know that it's the country with the biggest black population outside of Africa. You'll find so many African cultural roots, whether it's in the celebration of the hero Zumbi dos Palmares or even the Samba celebration. The cultural roots are there, linked to Africa. Obviously the United States, whether it's food, music, but even more recent, you look at communities such as Africatown. I don't know if some of you might not know it, Africatown in Alabama, where you still have a very distinct African root that is very, very visible. You might find out more about it. There's a documentary called Descendant that talks about the case of Africatown in Mobile, Alabama. And so I strongly believe that if they really want to, and we have to be intentional about this, if they really want to, black people from different origins can very easily overlook their differences, but focus on their similarities so that we can form very strong coalitions and demand the radical change and reforms that we want in so many of these biased and oppressive systems. But it requires that the intention and desire to overlook differences and associate around our similarities, because we are similar. We have very, very similar fates, obviously, and very similar origins, and that can be the basis of a very strong unity, a very strong unified coalition. Because let me tell you, we're talking about uprooting systems that started taking form in the 16th century. Many, we're talking about over centuries, all right? So demanding change to systems that have evolved for so long, it's almost like you want to perform a root canal on societies. And we all know how painful root canals can be. And you cannot do it unless there's a strong unified coalitions. So that's the message I will keep on pushing. You need strong coalitions, unity between black people of different origins if we want to change systems that are oppressive and that have been existing for over 400 years. There's no other way to demand that sort of radical change. Unity and collaboration. Now, obviously, the global Pan-African diaspora is so diverse, but has acquired fantastic skill sets in all the sectors and industries in the world. You name it. Now, can you imagine being able to pull from this source and create coalitions with this diversity of skill sets? You'll be able to create the strongest coalitions and the strongest power that has ever existed in the history of the world, given the diversity, but also given the fact that we share similar fates that maybe other racial groups or ethnicities do not share. Now, granted, even this whole concept of skin color, black, white, and so on, we clearly know it's an invention, all right? So this has been invented, obviously, with a certain agenda to justify certain, oppression and so on. So it's more political than biological. But still, it just so happens that if you have a black skin, there are systems that start taking place for centuries, but that we need to reform and we need to change. And this is also very important, just talking to different black communities. there's no black community that's inherently superior to another. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that there's any group of any sort of any humans that is inherently superior to another. When you take a different population subset, you will find bad apples and good apples in every population sample. That's just the way it is. Now, unfortunately, there are many within different black communities that absolutely reject the ideas of similarities between them. And some even go as far as totally refusing their descendants to Africa and just advancing ideas to push division, and some claim they're superior to the others. Now, one of those areas where I hear a lot of arguments about superiority is when it comes to formal education in the United States. And I think we need to dispel that. I sometimes hear in black immigrant communities arguments saying that, black immigrants are smarter, more intelligent, or better than African Americans because they obtain college degrees at a much higher rate. So let me just say off the bat, I totally do not believe in that argument at all. For one, a college education is no indication of one's superiority or anything along those lines. You're not smarter, more intelligent than somebody simply because you have a college degree. Not at all. But also, when you just look at statistics without really understanding the context, it can be very dangerous to just interpret numbers per se. So let's just look at the numbers, see what they tell us, and then we'll look at the context. So if we look at recent data from the US Census Bureau as of 2021, we'll see that about 28% of African Americans over the age of 25 have college degrees. So about 28%. In contrast, and by the way, this is led by women lead the way with professional degrees in, like dentistry, law, and things of that nature. Now, in contrast, if you look at black immigrant communities, led primarily by immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa with countries like Nigeria and so on, you will see that about 31% of adults over the age of 25 have college degrees. So remember, we had about 28% in the African American community and about 31% with black immigrants, with sub-Saharan Africans leading the way. Now, these numbers have been growing over the last few years, but are still much lower than the white population, where it's about 41% of people who have over the age of 25 that have college degrees. All right, so what are we to make of these numbers? And so how can we explain that black immigrants obtain college degrees at a much higher rate than African Americans? Well, there are several factors, all right, but I'd like to highlight just two of them for expediency. The first one, I think it has to do with just the family pressures, quite frankly, because many black immigrants that arrive into the United States are conditioned to see the United States as the ultimate destination to get better economic, educational, and professional opportunities. And so they come into the country with that conditioning, I would say, but also strong family incentive, because many people come in wanting to excel and having a whole family looking up to you or just wanting to make that difference, right? And it can also be family pressures. So the family pressure elements and just the country of origin pressures, those are powerful incentives to excel when you come into a new country, into the United States. But a second and maybe more important criteria and maybe more objective criteria, I would say that it just has to do with the quality of people who immigrate in the United States from their original population. You'll see that the sample population of black immigrants who immigrate in the United States tend to be highly educated to begin with, in the countries that they depart, that they emigrate from in order to immigrate into the United States. And so clearly the story would have been much different if you look at the overall population in the countries of origin where the black immigrants come from. If you look at their country of origin and then now you just compare the education attainment in their country of origin versus just the entire African American population in the United States, then obviously the gap would be so much bigger in favor of the African American, because you would see that in many countries of origin, poverty rates, illiteracy are higher, and so on and so forth. And so the numbers would be much, much, much different. But really, ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is that, look, we really need to stop wasting our time looking for differences and just focusing on similarities. And especially this whole college degree nonsense. I mean, forgive me here, but it's, we can never just base that as the ultimate judge of one's ability or capacity just because they have a college degree. There's much more. I think we would be better served spending our time on looking at different things and our similarities. But the one thing we cannot discount is that, yes, in the previous video, I mentioned that college is no longer a necessity in many instances for many people. You can find education out there in so many different avenues, online, and so on and so forth. But the reality remains that in many modern societies, whether it's United States, Europe, even Africa, we've placed such a big premium on collegiate education, right, as the best mechanism to go into a middle class income. And so because those systems are in place, and because black people tend to obtain college degrees at a much lower rate, then we need to do everything we can to ensure that black people are not left behind with regard to college education, because it still remains a very important way to ascend into a middle class income. And we would be better served by working together, like black people of different origins, working together to solve this sort of problems, creating coalitions. Because no matter how you cut it, like the saying goes, a 3-strand cord will be much stronger than a 1-strand cord. There is power in numbers, power in unity. So building coalition, once again, is a very essential, should be a very essential objective. And one other quick note I would say, I did a whole series of videos on Blaxiters, okay? So, and I'll put the link also on the bottom of this video. Blaxit essentially refers to the growing movement of black African Americans and black people from the Caribbean and so on, leaving the Western world, the United States, Europe, to relocate into Africa. So there's a whole Blaxit movement. And the term was coined by an academic, Dr. Ulysses. And so I like to say that insisting that black immigrants are superior to African Americans because of their statistical achievement would actually be the same as saying that Blaxiters are superior to the Africans that they find on the African continent because of their higher statistical achievement, right? So to me, both those comparisons are just as misguided as the other. Because again, if you look at the population sample of Blaxiters that are relocating into Africa, you will see that before relocating, these are people that are high achievers or that have achieved better financial, stability in their country of origin before relocating to Africa. And so they go in with US dollars and just foreign currencies. They have a much higher spending power and are able to seize on opportunities that many of the locals cannot seize just because of their financial shortcoming, right? But it's all about the population sample. And so again, I think I've spoken ad nauseum about this. The main message here is that we need to stop wasting our times by just highlighting differences and wanting to look at ideas of superiorities for one black group versus the other, when in fact we share very similar injustices. And so it behooves us to work together to build strong coalitions so that we can reform the systems towards a more equitable and just world. Because obviously, black people do not have any inherent deficiency that will make them incapable of succeeding. Quite to the contrary, right? It's just that we are wanting to reform systems that have existed for so long that, again, the only way to pull that off is to create coalition that will be composed of a mix of black people from very different origins that will bring different paradigms into the equations, and that will be complementary towards advancing the cause of all black people. And so to conclude here, let me say, okay, so we've talked a lot about black people and so on, but I want to make sure that we understand we should not fall into the trap of racism ever, all right? Because I'm a strong believer in what W.E.B. Du Bois said in his quote, very powerful in my estimation, when he said that, I believe that all men, black, brown, white, are brothers. I strongly do, because these racial categories were created anyways to advance certain political agenda. It's not based on biology. We are all brothers and sisters. I consider all men, regardless of their skin colors, to be my brothers and sisters. Oh man. So our issue is not to fight against any person based on their skin color, not at all. It is to fight oppressive system of structural injustices that have existed and that unfortunately have created a very negative heritage for many black people. And so till this day, we're still suffering the heritages of slavery, colonialism in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in many different countries around the world, where black people are subjected to just injustices based on systems that must be reformed. And so in order for us to pull it off, I think it starts with three things that are very important here. One, it starts with knowing yourself. Kind of like our brother Bob Marley said in his song Buffalo Soldier. I love that quote when he said, "If you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from, and you would stop asking me, who the hell do I think I am?" So it starts with knowing yourself. But second, it starts with loving and accepting yourself, like our brother Franz Fanon insinuated in his book, Black Skin, White Mask. But third and lastly, it starts with loving one another and believing in each other. We need to believe in each other. We need to unity. In his famous speech in 2004, former President Barack Obama, in the speech that brought him to the attention of the entire world, said one thing very powerful: E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. E pluribus unum. In his 1963 book, our brother, one of the great Pan-Africanist leaders, black heroes, Kwame Nkrumah, said in his 1963 book, "Africa must unite." And today I humbly say, and I mean very humbly, that not only Africans, but all black people must unite. We need to unite and form powerful coalitions that will demand change and reform these structural systems of injustice. And if we do, we will create the strongest coalition the world has ever seen. So there you have it. Now, in our next two installments, as I mentioned in the introduction, so the following video, we will look at concrete examples of how black people of different origin have been coming together, looking at history and looking at the present time. We look at heavy hitters: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Walter Rodney, and so on and so forth. You will see tremendous examples looking back at history, but also current time. And then our final video would be a how-to. We will look at concretely how we can come together and create these coalitions to demand change effectively, to advance obviously the cause of black people, but also to get towards a more equitable and just world. So again, back to the opening question. Should all black lives matter to all black people around the world? My answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely. Our fate and our destinies are intertwined. So there you have it. Thank you very much again for following this video today. Remember to like, subscribe on our channel, follow our social media profile, go on the website, enter your email so that you may get articles and follow our written blog. Until next time, may peace be with you. AfriKili, African intelligence to build bridges and change the image of black people around the world for a more equitable and more just world. Thank you very much.